What's your ghost story? Serious replies only. My wife and I were staying in her dead great-grandmother's house. It was night. I was standing in the living room, looking outside through all these big bay windows that overlooked a lake. I could see in the reflection of the window that my wife was standing behind me, and I said to her something forgettable. She didn't respond to me, so I looked straight at her reflection and said again, "Hey babe, blah blah blah." She again didn't respond to me, so I turned around, and she wasn't there. I called out to her, and she answered from the upstairs bedroom. My neck hair stood up. My blood felt like it ran cold. I didn't have the guts to turn around and look in the window again to see if it was like a coat reflection or something. I ran straight to the bedroom and said, "I think I saw a ghost." My wife said, "Yeah, probably. My great-grandmother totally haunts this place." This freaked me out. I still don't believe in ghosts, but I can't explain what that was. I was around 11 and I was convinced the house was haunted because I heard footsteps all the time, but no doors would open. One day, I was under my blanket and I heard the footsteps again. I check, and I see this little kid with black eyes, short hair, and was about as short as the bed, just staring at me, about 2 feet. I couldn't sleep in the dark, and I developed nyctophobia from it. Edit. The kid had black, scleria pale skin and black hair. His skin was so pale, I thought he was staring at me through the wall. About 10 years ago, I lived in a 100-year-old house. The dog and I were the only ones home. I went down to the basement to do laundry, and the dog, a lab shepherd mix, followed along. She was just sniffing around over by the old part of the basement, as I was bent down pulling clothes out of the dryer. All of a sudden, she runs full speed out of there and up the stairs. I never heard any noise, but definitely followed quickly upstairs. In the several years after that, we could never get her to come down to the basement with us. She was always the type of dog that had to be by your side constantly, but refused to go down to the basement again. I think animals sense things better than us humans. Another time, maybe a couple of months after that incident, my teenage son and I, along with the dog, were watching TV in the living room. We heard what sounded like adult booted footsteps coming up the wooden basement steps. I was waiting for the basement door to open. Even with the TV on, we both heard it at the same time. The dog even lifted her head and listened. Nothing happened, but freaked us out a bit. Residual haunting is what I think it was. Creepy though. I was driving across country with my mum and sister. I was 16, my sister 20, my mum in her 50s. It was late, but we were well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas, and they needed to pee. So we stopped at the only rest stop in about 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on some road trip, and a small grey compact car, like a Honda Accord, parked at the pump in front of us. 2 men, about 17 to 20, were standing outside the Honda, in hoodies, statue frigging still. The teenagers were to our left. When we got there, everything felt wrong. There was a deep and unsettling feeling about the place, and we'd not felt that at any other rest stop. We'd been on the road for days, and seen many rest stops at night, and had never been afraid. Until then. My mum and sister went inside and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was mostly watching the car in front, and the two men who had still not moved at all, not an inch. They weren't talking, they weren't on phones, there was no light anywhere but the dim overhead lights on the gas station awning. They were just frigging standing there, still as stone. My sister and Mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the two men slowly turned to look at us, while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear we all saw the same thing. They had eyes, dark as pitch, and empty, truly empty. Not black, not reflecting any light at all, just a frigging void. We booked it. We have not travelled in excess of 100 miles per hour before or since. But heck, that day it was warranted. We drove until we were in the next city before we got out of the car again. And you know what the worst frigging thing about it? Not the eyes, not the stillness, not that horrible feeling, not the weirdo in the gas station who kept telling my mum and sister, "My mama will like you," over and over while mopping the same spot on the floor with a dry mop and an empty bucket. It was the fact that we couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't frigging find it on Google Maps or on any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road to confuse looks, and "Are you sure you weren't travelling on highway and not interstate?" We travelled on that interstate since, and there was no rest stop. Probably get buried, but whatever. When my husband and I got married, we adopted a 10-year-old black lab. She was displeased when we brought home a baby 9 months after, but mostly was cool with him. She died when my son was 18 months, and we adopted another elderly lab. Last Christmas Eve, my son is 4 at this point, I was walking upstairs. A few steps from the top, I saw a lab walk out of my son's room and go into ours. I flicked on the light in our room and said something to the dog about checking in on her boy, and the room is empty. I called downstairs, and my husband said the dog was sleeping on the couch with him. Our Maggie, apparently, came to check in on us. So, I actually have a few, but some of them are fairly long and require a bit of context, so I'll tell the worst one. I grew up on an old farm. It was no longer operational, but the point is we had a lot of land, a lot of old buildings, and a lot of people died on said property. Anyways, I was 15, and I had a habit of wandering the property and seeing what I could find, since not even my dad had seen every building on the property, and I wanted to find one my dad had never seen. I found myself in the junkyard, basically where everyone who owned the house dumped their scrap, and I liked wandering around there and seeing all the old useless crap. On one side of the junkyard was this pretty large sandy knoll, and there was an old wooden door on the knoll. My dad explicitly told me numerous times, never move the door, and me, being my stupid teenage self, moved it, thinking my dad or someone had buried a cupboard of alcohol or maybe a bunker. It was just a regular wooden door in the side of the mound. I shrugged and left, never thinking about it. The next week of my life, it was like hell was unleashed upon my home. Doors slammed, 3 windows shattered, plates broke, appliances stopped working, my mum got pushed down the stairs, my dog was always on edge, and the nightmares. Night after night I couldn't sleep because of the nightmares. I was being stalked by a mass of moving darkness that got closer and closer to me every night. On day 5, my dad confronted me after window number 3 broke, and I confessed to having moved the door. It was the angriest I've ever seen my dad. He was livid. He yelled at me about this and that. Told me I had to go and put the door back exactly the way it was. I was scared witless, having never seen my dad that angry, and ran as fast as I could back to the junkyard. I moved the door perfectly back to where it was. The events happening at the house didn't stop instantly, but tapered off over the next few days. My dad finally explained to me that although he didn't know exactly what it was, he just knew there was something evil beneath that knoll, and that he had been told by my great-grandfather to never move that door. After those events, I never went back to the junkyard, still haven't. You can just feel something angry back there, and I never want to be there alone, ever again. I was staying at my cousin's house with my mom in rural Alabama, and I got the room upstairs by myself, a converted attic. No door, just stairs and a room at the top. I woke up in the middle of the night to someone whispering, "Hey, hey," from the bottom of the stairs. Sounded a little like my mom, so got up to see who it was. No one was there. Next morning I tell my cousin, who said, "Oh yeah, that's Charlotte, like it's no big deal." Come to find out, the house was pretty old and used to be owned by a doctor. He had a wife named Charlotte who had died in the house during childbirth. I slept downstairs the next night. I was age 9 and at home by myself at night while my mum was out attending a class. I was wandering around the house, a big old farmhouse, looking for something to do, when I saw an old man walking down a corridor. I thought that someone had broken into the house, so after shouting at him I gave chase, but he just continued walking down the corridor, completely oblivious to me, and silently disappeared into a room at the end of the corridor just moments before I was about to catch up to him. I got into that room at the end just 2 seconds before he did, but in those moments he had vanished into thin air. Still thinking I had seen an intruder and not a ghost, I checked all the locks and doors etc. in the house, and the building was tight. But as I retraced my steps back to the corridor, I realised that a lot of things didn't add up, such as the fact that while opaque, his appearance was oddly faded, like someone had sprinkled dust all over him. His clothes looked unusually dated, like something an upper-class gentleman might wear on a shooting trip between 1920 and 1950. He didn't make a sound going down that squeaky, echoey corridor, and he didn't react at all to me shouting at him, nor giving chase. When my mum came home, I told her about what I'd seen, but oddly she didn't want to talk about it. Years later, after some workmen saw the exact same ghost walking down the corridor, they too also initially thought the old man was real and totally freaked out when they realised that they'd seen a ghost. My mum and later brother both confessed that they too had seen the same corridor ghost. I can't be certain who the ghost was, but in an odd twist, a couple of years after I saw the old man ghost, some old black and white photos were discovered during a clean of the farm office, and some of them featured one of the previous owners of the farm, who ran the place up until the 50s, and he was wearing near identical clothing, a tweed hunting suit, to the old man ghost I saw. In another odd twist, I later remembered that when my brother and I were very little, 4 and 6, we became convinced that an old man ghost lived under the antique carpet of that corridor, and sometimes to the cellar next to it, whose ventilation vents opened up under a step at the beginning of the corridor, and we formed this idea that he was a grumpy old man ghost, which we named Mr. Nobody because he had no body, who hated children, which we didn't think was very fair, and so we would try to aggravate him by hurling insults at him down the cellar stairs or under the corridor carpet before running away in fright. I thought it was just our childish imagination, some bizarre game we had conjured as very little children. But after seeing an actual old man ghost in the corridor, who was then seen by at least 4 other people in separate incidences over the years, I did wonder why on earth we were so convinced of the old man ghost's existence before we even first saw him. Years ago, a few friends and I went to hang out in a graveyard. Stupid thing to do for a bunch of bored 18-year-olds on a weekday night, but what happened next was very real to all of our experiences. We were driving my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through that massive graveyard. We stopped to get out and walk around. We walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was someone sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black, and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact it looked like a man who was wearing some old style top hat. Stupid us waved and shouted, "Hi!" He didn't show any acknowledgement or wave back. The man sat on the rock, still. All of a sudden, he jumped to his feet, started running to us on the water, and then vanished into thin air, about halfway on the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to the car. I didn't want to believe what we saw, but we all saw it happen. We got back to her car and tried to start it. It wouldn't start. Frantically trying to get it started, we all started panicking and getting very scared. That's when we heard some banging on the car from the back. It wasn't a constant bang, but every few seconds or so we'd hear it. Nobody was outside from what we could see in the dark, but something was making a noise on the car. At this point, I'm having a full-blown panic attack, screaming and crying to get us out. Luckily, my friend seemed a bit less panicky than I was and helped keep me calm. It was obvious that they were just as freaked out, however more speechless and pale-faced. We would have left the car in the graveyard and walked the long journey to the exit if it wasn't for the banging on the car. We didn't want to get out and leave. After about a minute, the banging stopped. I'll call my mom to come give us a boost, I thought. I'm not entirely sure why none of us thought to call sooner. However, I don't believe anyone thinks rationally while panicking. At this point, 15 minutes had gone by since we got back in her car. I opened my phone and started dialing and realised I had no service. None of us had any cell service. We bantered back and forth for a few more minutes, trying to figure out what to do, and decided against leaving the car because whatever was outside was not what we wanted to come face to face with. The next 30 minutes were spent trying to get the car started. No banging was heard afterwards, but we felt this heavy feeling around us, almost as if it created this pressure on our chest. It's quite difficult to explain as I've never felt anything like it before. Finally, her car started and she hit the pedal to the metal. We sped out of the graveyard so fast. Immediately crossing the gates, all of our phones regained cell service. I'll never be able to explain what caused any of this or why certain things happened. One thing I know for certain is that someone or something was out there, and it was not an animal or human. When I was 17 or 18, I met a girl in an AOL chat room that lived in another state. We became pretty good friends, and I found out she was Wiccan. Never knew anyone who was Wiccan before, so was always asking about it. One day we got on the topic of ghosts, and she said she had 2 living in her house. One an elderly lady who stayed to herself, and another one that was a girl about our age who liked trying to play around with my friend. One day she said the younger ghost wanted to meet me, so I said fine with me, not thinking anything about it. That night I was laying in bed with my back to the door when I started hearing footsteps coming from my door. I looked over my shoulder to see who it was, but no one was there. I laid back down and listened as the footsteps walked the length of my bed. I tried talking to see if I got a response, but didn't get any answer. After several minutes, the stepping sound stopped. I rolled over a few minutes later to see if I could see anything. Didn't see a thing. After saying thanks for visiting, I closed my eyes to get to sleep. As I was falling asleep, I heard my bed creaking at the foot of my bed. No movement, just sound. I immediately looked, but again, I didn't see anything. The creaking sound slowly moved up my bed. I'd peek every so often and never saw anything. So again, I said, I appreciate the visit, but I'm tired and want to sleep. The next night I was talking to my friend and she said the ghost was really mad. So I told her about the previous night. As I was typing it all out, I saw a moth flying around the room. It landed on the monitor, so I picked it up and tossed it outside. After hitting send on my message, my friend said the girl was very upset and had just thrown a bug at her monitor. I asked her to describe it, and she perfectly described the moth I had just tossed out. I hadn't said a word about the moth at the time because it didn't seem relevant to our conversation. When she described it, I told her I'd just tossed a moth out that looked just like it, and she agreed that was really weird. I apologised to the girl for upsetting her, and said I'll try to be more aware if she came back. We remained friends for another year or so after that, but lost contact with each other. I didn't get on AOL as often anymore, and she moved and stopped logging on. If you have enjoyed this video and these stories, please click the thumbs up button. If you have a ghost story of your own, please feel free to tell me and my subscribers all about it in the comments. If you think your friends and family would like this video, then please share it with them on social media using one of the icons below the video. Either way, clicking the like button, commenting and sharing are all very much appreciated, and let the YouTube algorithm know that this video is one that should be recommended. If you haven't already done so, please also click the subscribe button and then turn on all notifications by clicking the bell icon. That way, YouTube will tell you when a new video is loaded up. I have two channels, this one and UK Paranormal Files. Please do subscribe to both if you would like to see the full extent of my content, and a button to subscribe will appear shortly on the end screen. As always, all it's there for me to say is, thanks very much for watching.